What's wrong with you people?
Welcome to Not Another Baptist Podcast. I am Kyle Bierman, and Matt Hensley is off with some responsibilities at his home and his job this week. So I am very excited to welcome a repeat guest.
Repeat.
And
have I been on here before?
You have been on here, Mark. Back in about 28, maybe spring of 2018.
I have a very bad short-term memory. So.
So we are joined today by Mark Clifton, the Senior Director of Replant for the North American Mission Board, and he just so happens to be my boss now. Mark, so back in the spring of 2018, you were our first quote-unquote big guest that we had on. And
I have lost some weight since then, so it's not, I appreciate that, but
you were our first kind of big deal guest.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry, I misunderstood what you meant.
And then we went on and we had J.D. Greer and Ken Hemphill as they were getting ready to they were running against each other in the SBC president. And from there, I mean, that kind of the podcast just really took off. Mark, so you were the catalyst.
Oh, sure.
Spark.
Yeah, I'm sure. That's.
But it's been about 5 years since you were on the show, and some things have changed in the world around us since then.
Yeah, a little bit.
My role has obviously changed. At the time, I was pastoring First Baptist Church Alamogordo, New Mexico, and later on that year, came on as a contractor with the Replant team, and now I've been a full-time employee there for a couple of years. And so, yeah, a lot of things have changed. But we're going to talk about a few things today. We're going to talk about kind of this ongoing work of replanting. We're going to talk about the re-release of Reclaiming Glory, and then we'll talk about a new or revamped podcast that you're a part of and that I get to kind of run the background on as well. So, Mark, to start off with, just reintroduce yourself to our listeners. Most of them are going to know who you are, but maybe there are a few.
They aren't either. Most of them don't have a clue. That's awful nice of you, but most people don't have a clue. Hey, I'm Mark Clifton. I live in Kansas, and I've been in 40th year. This is my 40th year of working for the Home Mission Board or the North American Mission Board. I mean, I started right out of seminary. I went right from college to seminary. I was 22, so you do the math. But anyway, I was 40th year, and most of that time was spent planting churches and helping state conventions plant churches. But the last 10 years has been totally focused on replanting and revitalizing dying churches. And the reality is, I'm the Senior Director of Replanting, Rural Ministry, Revitalization, Bivocational Ministry, Bus Ministry, Children's Ministry, Puppet Ministry.
Other duties is assigned by Kevin Ezel.
I'm being facetious. I am the Senior Director of Replanting and Rural Ministry at NAM. And in that role, I have the opportunity, Kyle, to see some really amazing things that are taking place in the Southern Baptist Convention. I'm serious, man. I wake up every day and I just wish that our Southern Baptist constituents could see the incredible change that's taken place in the last 15 years, from ignoring dying churches to running toward dying churches, from dying churches being something we didn't even want to talk about to something now that is really one of the greatest success stories Southern Baptists have, and that hundreds of churches that would have closed their doors are thriving again. And it's not just like one way it's happening. It's not like we figured out some secret code and we figured it out. It really is a movement of God to bring life back to his churches. And I'm just excited to be a part of it. I think it's the best story, one of the best stories anyway, in Southern Baptist life. And it's not controversial. I've yet to wake up and have anybody say, we shouldn't be replanting dying churches. Everybody's in favor of helping dying churches. And just this morning, man, I got a message from a church I'd never met, didn't know. They said, man, we've been praying about it. We want to adopt or foster a dying church. How do we get started? I hear that every single day. Stronger churches have been compelled by the Holy Spirit to help churches that are struggling. And struggling churches are now, for the first time, really coming open-handed, saying, you know what, we will give up day-to-day control in order that God be glorified and this church continue to live. And when that happens, Kyle, the church continues to live. So it's a great time, and I love what I do. And I just wish Southern Baptists could know more of the great stories that are taking place all across North America, from Alaska to Florida. I'm serious. I could point to some great replants in Alaska, great replants in Florida, and everywhere in between. In cities, in small towns, in open country, it's happening all across North America. And again, it's the greatest untold story out there.
Yeah. You mentioned about the exciting things that are happening. One of the things that's really exciting to me is all the resources that are available right now that weren't available 10 or 12 years ago. I was visiting with our pastor. We had him on a recent episode, and he was talking about when he came to Highland Baptist Church in Lubbock in 2012 and started what we now know and would call a revitalization. And he said at the time there wasn't a whole lot of resources that were out there. And in the last 10 or 12 years, you've written a couple of books. Tom Rainer's written quite a bit, Mark Halleck, Brian Croft. I mean, there's a wealth of resources out there. So if somebody is getting into a pastorate, and more than likely, if somebody's going into a pastorate, it's a revitalization. I think we're somewhere around 90% of the churches across the SBC are plateaued or declining. There's a wealth of resources out there right now to help pastors along. And I think that's one of the most exciting things. And we're continuing to develop resources.
And the focus of our resources are not programmatic. They're
Right.
Christ-centered. They're gospel-centered. It is Christ that revitalizes the church. It's a gospel focus that revitalizes the church. It's a missional focus that revitalizes the church. It's not a denominational program. So when you say we've created a bunch of resources, we really haven't created any resources, to be frank about it. We've seen what God has been doing across North America, and we just gathered up that information and kind of put it in a form that people can understand and we can disseminate. And so we're just sharing what God's doing, and you can learn from it, and He can do it where you are as well. It's really that simple. We just sort of connect the dots all across North America where God's working, and it comes out to be a really beautiful picture.
Yeah. Well, let's talk quickly about the re-release of Reclaiming Glory. So this book, I was given in the first couple of months, the first edition of this, I was given in first couple of months that I was at First Baptist Alamogordo. And that's actually how I got connected with the replant team, because I read the book and I went, I think this is what I'm doing. So I reached out to Bob, and that led to conversations with you, and ultimately led to a job. So thank you for writing the book, because that's
yeah. Thanks for everybody thinking all they got to do is read the book and they get a job. That's not exactly how it works, but
no,
I hear you.
But earlier this year, Reclaiming Glory was re-released and updated and re-released. And so talk to us kind of about the thought process behind updating the stories.
Well, I didn't want to write the book. I didn't want to write the book because, number one, I've never written a book, and I haven't even read all that many books, to be frank about it. I buy them, I glance through them, and then I put them on my shelf, and they look impressive. Like everybody else that's listening to me right now, to be frank about it. No, really, I just didn't really know if I didn't really understand if people would really read a book that I wrote, frankly, and one day I kind of wondered, would I even read a book that I wrote? So I wasn't a great scholar in seminary or college or elementary school, for that matter, and so writing just wasn't my deal. And but when I came to NAM and God began to do some really cool things in replanting, the folks at the North American Mission Board said, "You really need to put this down. You really need to put it in a book form." And so I did. I was a little reluctant again because I just don't write books, but I put it in a book form. Had a wonderful editor named Toby who really helped me put it in a good book form. He helped me a lot with that. And frankly, to God's glory alone, the book really resonated with people, and it surprised everybody, including Lifeway, I think. And not only that, it sold so many. And by the way, I agreed to give every dollar of every royalty back to missions, to replanting, because when I wrote the book, I didn't think there'd be all that much anyway. So it seemed like a no-brainer. Now looking back on it, that ship already sailed. So when you buy the book, all the royalties go to the North American Mission Board, but to replanting at the North American Mission Board. But back to what I was talking about. Much to everybody's surprise, I think it really took off. And the reason it took off, I think, is threefold. Number one, it's a very simple read, okay? I had a guy tell me, man, I read your book on the plane. I said, no, you read it on the tarmac. It's not that lengthy of a read. Secondly, it's really written experientially. It's all packed with stories and experiences of what God is doing. And thirdly, these principles are so transferable to wherever you are. So I think the simplicity of it and the directness of it and the timeliness of it. I mean, it was seriously, it was God who really motivated people to motivate me to write this book at the right time. And so it sold really, really well. And in addition to that, it kept selling. It didn't have a short shelf life, as they say. And so a lot of the seminaries use it in their doctoral work and their other work. Guys read it all the time. So, Kyle, it was now about 5 years old. And the stories in the middle of the book, there are like 5 or 6 stories of transformation. And those stories were now 7 or 8 years old because they were a couple of years old when I wrote about them. And Lifeway just felt like this book had a longer shelf life, and they wanted me to update the stories and update some of the numbers and the statistics and just make it more current. So we did that. So the new book has all brand new stories in the center of it. So these are stories that have taken place really since the first book was written, and it has updated statistics. And wait, there's more. It has study guide questions at the end of each chapter. So you can use it because people were saying, I want to use this in a small group. I want to use this with my missions team. So there's a study guide, some questions at the end of each chapter. And there are videos, teaching videos that go with each chapter. So the new book has new stories, new statistics, study guide questions, and teaching videos that go with each chapter. And it came out in January, and it is doing really, really well. And I'm very grateful for that. It is very affirming that this is the message that the church needs today, and affirming that this is something God really has brought to us. And I'm just fortunate that I was able to be a part of it.
Yeah. Well, and so, in 2015, you started it off by talking about the Royals World Series championship. And this one, you get to start off talking about the Chiefs.
Yeah, isn't that
the Chiefs
cool?
Super Bowl. So you just need to keep writing books because the Kansas City sports teams are doing really well.
Well, here's the deal, man. When I wrote it in 2013-14, I was being a big Royals fan, right? I mean, 85, they went to the World Series, George Brett. Yeah. I mean, it was a great time. And then after 85, nothing. I mean, the biggest drought in Major League Baseball. And I said I would go to the stadium and you'd see the banners from 85, and it didn't make you feel good. It made you remember how much you've lost.
Yeah.
And so I connected that to going to a dying church, and the past seems so long ago, and like we're never going to come back again. And then that very next year, the Royals, they go to one World Series and lose it in the last inning of the last game, and then they go back the second year and they win it. And so see, there's hope. So when we updated the story, guess what? The Chiefs hadn't been to the Super Bowl since 1971. I updated, and the Chiefs go to the Super Bowl. So isn't that cool?
So
they go to, it was great. So updated
next time the Kansas City, teams hit a drought, you just got to release a book, man, and there you go.
There you go. That is pretty cool.
I'm glad you touched on two things. You touched on the study guide, study questions at the end of the chapters, which I think are really helpful for pastors to think through, pastor reading groups, church leadership teams, Sunday night, Wednesday night Bible studies, and then the videos, the short, typically I think 10, 15 minutes.
Right.
Videos.
And they're free. They don't cost anything. You can get them. So it's not like an added charge or anything like that.
Yeah, that's good. Well, then this year we also had a bit of a change in a podcast that you've been a part of for the last 5 or 6 years. And so
right.
for several years you did Revitalize and Replant with Tom Rainer.
Right. I did that. Yep.
And then this year it switched over and it became Revitalize and Replant with Mark Clifton.
Yeah.
And we got to add a couple of really interesting characters to this podcast. So
we
talk
did.
to us about the podcast.
Well, I love Tom Rainer. He's been so good to me, and he gave me an incredible platform. Not me, but the work we want to accomplish. He saw the importance of replanting, and he wanted to really platform that. And so, I mean, nobody knew who I was at all. He had this incredible platform, and he brought me on, and I mean, for 5 years, he really just shared his platform with us so that we could have this amazing opportunity to talk about this tremendous ministry that God's doing across North America. So, Tom, man, I appreciate you. I love you. Thank you for being so unselfish with that and for sharing that. But he's getting up in age, and he has to be back at the home by 4 every afternoon, and so that made it hard for us to continue. No, I'm just kidding. He'll kill me for that. I told him he and I should go, because I'm not much younger than him. I said he and I should go on a tour together, and we could call it the Earth, Wind, and Fiber Tour. So that would work, because he always liked 60s music. But no, he really did suggest. We kind of talked about it. He said, "Man, you can do this." He wanted to go in a different direction now and do some other things in leadership and church leadership. And he said, "Man, just take the podcast." So we've taken Revitalize and Replant. Now, he'll be a guest from time to time. He's not going to be a total stranger, but it's our podcast now. And so we have you manage it, you run it, you do a great job. And then we have Mark Halleck, who is the pastor of Calvary Church in Denver. He's replanted that church and replanted 30 churches across the Mountain States. And then my good friend Dan Hurst, we've been together for 40 years. We grew up together. He's been a church planter. He and I planted churches together. He's also an amazing voice talent. That's what he does for a living, and he's great on the podcast. So it's Dan and myself and Mark, and then you're the production guy, and we do it together. We always are in the same room, and we're not like across the country. We figure out some way to get together for a couple of days straight, and we do like 15 podcasts a day until we're just totally loopy. It's hard to follow what we're doing.
Yes, that is true.
And they're short. They're only 20 minutes. And so it's really a lot of fun, a lot of interaction. And I really do believe a lot of really great information. I've heard a lot of good stuff about it. And it comes out twice a week. I mean, on Tuesdays and Thursdays. So we get 2 a week. And if you want to, you can just like save it up and not listen to them for like 4 weeks and then binge listen, right? You can just listen to all of them, get the kids around the old radio there and just listen. No, not really, but you could binge listen. But we'd love to have you be part of our family of Revitalize and Replant, available wherever you get your podcast, by the way.
Yeah. So that, it's gone live 2 a week. So there are a little over a dozen podcasts so far that are up. And I'll just say, as the guy who kind of gets to be on the fly on the wall in the room when we all are having these discussions, as the engineer, producer, whatever you want to call it. Man, if you are involved in any kind of revitalization or just pastoral ministry in general, this is a really, really valuable resource. There's a ton of experience in there. Some really interesting stories that have come out of what you and Mark and Dan have experienced. And listen, Mark, I told you this a couple weeks ago. You used to be the most interesting man that I know. Dan Hurst has surpassed you.
Yes, Dan takes being interesting to a whole different level. Dan was born. He was raised in Honduras. His parents were missionaries to Honduras, Southern Baptist missionaries. But his dad and my dad were roommates in college, best men at each other's weddings. Dan and I started churches together. We went to college together. We started businesses together. All of them failed. Every business we started failed miserably, and some of them we thought they were serious, but they were really ridiculous. And we've just had a lot of fun in our life, and it shows. We try to keep that to a limited amount on the podcast so it doesn't get out of hand. But Dan and I have been around for a long time, and we've really enjoyed each other. So I'm really grateful to get to work with him. He is a tremendous talent, by the way. They give something equivalent to an Oscar, the movie industry does, for the best movie trailer of the year. He won that this year. I'm not going to tell you what movie it was, but he won basically what you would call the Oscar for the best movie trailer. He does national commercials for food chains and for restaurants. I hear him all the time on the radio and on television, hear his voice. And then to have him, be the guy that is our announcer for our podcast and interact with us, because he's also been a pastor, been a church planter, been a music leader, been a singer. I mean, he's a great composer and a great singer. He's had music on K-Love and stuff like that. I mean, and he's interviewed. You're right. He was also the he was the stadium announcer at Royal Stadium for like 20 years. So he's met every baseball player in the world. And he had the #1 radio show in Kansas City on Soft Rock here in Kansas City for 15 years. He's interviewed everybody from Paul McCartney to, everybody.
Yeah.
And so he is a man of incredible wisdom and interest for sure. And then you bring Halleck into the picture. And Halleck is this amazing guy who just loves everybody, and everything comes out of his mouth is just powerfully important. And he's just a pastor's pastor. Halleck loves people. He loves his church, and he has such incredible wisdom and insight. And so the three of us get in a room together, and anything can happen, and it usually
Yes.
does. So
Yes.
yeah, it's a great podcast.
Well, and we've had the opportunity to record in some pretty interesting spots. So we recorded at Calvary in Inglewood, kind of the one of the more important places in this replanting movement at Calvary Inglewood. That, as you said, out of there they've replanted 30 churches.
I call it the mother church of replanting.
Yes.
How the Ryman's the mother church of country music, because in the modern replanting movement. Now, look, I know people have replanted churches since day one, but in this modern kind of movement of replanting. It was about, 14 years ago or something. He went to Inglewood, had 30 people. It'll have 800 a weekend. But more important than the number is that he has a whole residency of raising up men to go replant churches. And as I said, they've replanted 30 of them across the mountain states, in cities, in small towns, in open countries. And Mark is just passionate about replanting. So we decided that the first series of our podcast would be done from Calvary Inglewood. They have a podcast studio in the sub-basement in the youth room. And it's not palatial. Let's just say that. We do sit on this dirty old white couch that was in the youth room. And Mark sits next to me on the couch, and the entire time Mark is talking to me, he's rubbing my shoulder and squeezing my neck. He can't talk without touching my shoulder and squeezing my neck. And he's highly extroverted. I'm highly introverted. So it's a real interesting dynamic on the old youth white couch. And by the way, I don't really understand why churches decide it's a good idea to put couches in youth rooms, but that's a whole nother topic for a whole nother day.
We talked about this a little bit. You guys did on those episodes, but we were at Calvary, which is, as you mentioned, kind of this mothership. And the thing is, it's not like a hip modern facility.
No,
this is an old church building, drafty, down in the basement. It was fantastic. Loved it.
It is a 1960s Southern Baptist church building that was built by volunteers over a 20-year period by whatever they could pull off the shelf at Home Depot that Saturday when they were building it. And I'm not picking on Mark's church. He would agree with that. Yeah. It is very humble. And they didn't go in there and say, okay, in order to reach our neighborhood, we got to just blow this thing up and create something really cool and jazzy. They said, in order to reach our neighborhood, we got to love our neighborhood. We got to love people. And if you love people, they'll come to almost anything. And, it's a clean building, and they've updated it and that kind of thing. But I agree. Man, it looks like any 1960s. It's long and narrow. You know how the worship center looks like a bowling alley. It's really long and narrow, and a lot of stairs, a lot of different entrances. Not clear where you come in, but 800 people a weekend, 30 church plants out of that thing. It just shows you that God can do so much with things that we would look at and go, well, that nothing could happen there. Yeah. And I love the fact that Mark, he highlights that we don't have to have everything we think. We just have to have the gospel, and we have to love people and let Jesus do what he'll do in his church. So yeah, that was a great experience. And then we moved from there to where? Where did we go next?
Went to the Spurgeon Library at Midwestern, which was one of the coolest settings I've ever been in to record a podcast.
Yeah, right here in Kansas City. Years ago, like 120 years ago or something like that, turn of the 20th century, Mrs. Spurgeon was selling a lot of his books, his whole library. They needed money. Frankly, the college and the church needed money. And it just so happened that there were some folks in Missouri Baptist were over in London at the time and found out about the sale and wired back. And long story short, the Missouri Baptist Convention made a bid and they won it. So all of his library was shipped over to Missouri. He was housed at William Jewell College, which was the only Baptist college in Missouri at the time for decades. That's where I went to college. But recently, Dr. Allen managed to purchase the entire library from William Jewell. and they converted the old chapel at Midwestern into the Spurgeon Library. It is palatial. It is gorgeous. It has all of his books. It has a lot of his personal material, like the doorknob from his office, seriously, a pew from the Methodist church where he was converted, a bottle of water from the River Lark where he was baptized. By the way, I have a bottle of water. I had a bottle of water from the River Lark before Midwestern did.
Nice.
I still have it here at my house. And I'm not going to say that once in a while I don't put a drop of that in the baptistry when I baptize somebody, but I'm not going to say I don't. But nonetheless, Midwestern has all this wonderful things from Spurgeon, and they have a podcast studio there. And it was actually Spurgeon's podcast studio.
That's right. That's right.
Used. We call it, yeah. He had such a foreknowledge of things he knew. No, really. But they have a great podcast studio right there in the Spurgeon Library. So you and I and Dan and Mark, we spent a couple of long days there enjoying all that was Spurgeon and doing the podcast from the Spurgeon Library. And then the next group we're going to do will be from, as the Lord allows, New Orleans.
Yep,
so we'll all be down there together. So, it's a little unusual. A lot of guys don't get together in the same room when they do podcasts, but we really want to be with each other because guess what, Kyle? All four of us really, really love each other.
Yeah, we do.
And we really enjoy being together. Yep.
And there's a really good energy to the podcast that comes from being in the same room together. And so, let me highly recommend, if you've not already subscribed to that, please, you can go to revitalizeandreplant.com and find those episodes that are already up. Again, those are dropping 2 a week for the next few months.
Maybe till Jesus comes back. I want to do 2 a week. I just want to keep doing 2 a week. People go, man, that's a lot. Yeah, I know, but I think they're fun. I think I'm going to do 2 a week as long as we can.
Okay.
Yeah, I do.
And then you can find the book at reclaiming-glory.com, of course, Lifeway, Amazon, all of those places as well. Mark, man, thank you so much for coming back on. I know I get to interact with you really on a weekly basis, and it's great for our listeners to have you on as well.
Thank you, man. I serve a great team of men at the North American Mission Board who work in replanting and revitalization. All of them are like you, Kyle. They all love this work. They don't do it because it's a job. They do it because it's a calling, and I just am privileged to serve with them, and then to serve with so many great associational missionaries all across North America and state convention leaders. I mean, everybody that I come in contact with is united in this effort to reclaim dying churches, and it's just a wonderful place to be right now. So if you don't know more about it, learn more about it. Go to churchreplanters.com. Find all kinds of stuff about us there. Stay in touch with us, as Kyle said. Check us out on the new podcast, Revitalize and Replant. And sometimes we even have ventriloquist dummies on Revitalize and Replant. So that happens. Puppets, we have puppets on there. We do
special music. Yeah,
special music. We do recipes. We have a cooking segment where Mark and I cook a meal, and you get to taste it. It's a really fun podcast.
Traffic and weather on the 8s.
We do. They say that's why people listen. We have traffic and weather on the 8s, and we do have to get done with the podcast quick because the 70s at 7 come up right after us. So I don't know why NAM even lets us do this. I'm not sure they even listen to it because it's quite different than anything else the North American Mission Board does. Yeah, for sure. But anyway, until they take us off the air, we'll be there.
That's right. And as always, we mentioned this before, but if we can serve you, if the Replant team can serve you in any way, you can contact us at replant@nam.net. And we have a whole team, as Mark said, of folks that love helping dying churches come back to life and experience new health and growth.
And if your church is struggling, reach out to us.
Yes,
please.
Yep.
We want to talk to you, pray with you, hook you up with some people that can care for you. We don't want you to do this alone. All right.
Yeah. Well, Mark, thanks for being on with us today. And as always, thank you to our listeners for listening to this each and every week. God bless you. And until next time, may your coffee be as black as night and as bold as the gospel you declare.
What's wrong with you people?